Safe Software is pleased to present the 2009 FME International User Conference. This session is presented by Tim Albert, a GIS analyst with Focus Corporation. Tim has more than 17 years of progressive technical experience and currently manages the GIS team at Focus Corporation's Victoria office. His responsibilities include project management, quality control, and promoting GIS services.
So we'll start off with a little bit of a description of the client that we were working for. Being consultants, lots of different projects every day. This one we had a great opportunity to use FME to help this client get some information that they were having trouble getting their hands on. One of the clients here that we have done a lot of work for is the National Association of Friendship Centres, and they're a cross-Canada network. They're not a federal government organization, but they're funded by the federal government. Wide range of programs. Their clientele is urban Aboriginals, so a very specific type of person they're looking for. This is a map of the different friendship centres across Canada, so you can see very widely spaced. If you know Canada at all, make huge urban centres all the way down to tiny little communities located in very rural locations. Their real problem is whenever they would go to Statistics Canada and ask for information on the communities that they were servicing, sort of from a management level, they would get multiple types of geography back. If you're familiar with census geography at all, there's CMAs, which are sort of metropolitan areas. There's CSDs, which are basically municipalities. And then there's the smallest area that they'll provide DAs, which are very tiny, about 400 people breakouts. When we start taking a look at across Canada what it would look like, for instance, this is all the census subdivisions or municipalities, we could say, across Canada. They're very good at using for this type of analysis because they are legal boundaries. They don't really change too much over time unless there's an amalgamation of municipalities or something like that, which is of use to them because they wanted to look at time series of data as well. When we overlay that with the actual friendship center locations, we can see we have some problems. We can take a look up there in northern Alberta. We have this one friendship center which is saying that it services half of northern Alberta, which of course makes no sense. A lot of other areas we're getting very, very tiny areas. So for this project, we had some constraints that were set upon us. It was put in motion by Indian and Northern Affairs. They brought together a team of us for the mapping, other people for doing literature review on what type of information to get from Statistics Canada that's actually going to be of use to these people in managing what type of services they offer at different friendship centers. And we decided that we would use these two major types of geography, the census subdivisions or the dissemination areas. The product in the end, though, still had to go back to Statistics Canada so we could get some information from them in a logical, usable format for display and for the client to use. So we used two approaches. For the northern section, we used those smaller areas, those dissemination areas, because we could get a good idea. You think about a northern community, everything's along the highway. So you have the one sort of central place, and then spread out along the highway, you'll get more information or more people that are living that would travel to that center for their services. So that's what we used in the north. In the south, we used census subdivisions, and that was mostly because they're more structured and easier to handle. We also looked at where would be some potential areas. So using this geography and figuring out where they already had service centers, where would also be an area that we could maybe have gaps, that they could have put new friendship centers and therefore have more of a network across Canada. We looked at two approaches to the core, where the actual friendship center was located in a census geography, a tier 1 and then a tier 2. So let's just get right into it. We used FME because we could automate the process. We could repeat it for every year. We'll do it for 2011 when the next census comes out. We needed to output to a whole bunch of different formats, shape, access, tables, Excel, a whole bunch of different things for them to use. Could do some quality control and some calculations on the way. So let's just take a look at one example of the southern approach. If we take a look down in Ottawa, its friendship center there is represented by the red dot. We get a sort of a just general overview of what Ottawa is like. The pink, sort of brown area is the urban core. When we take a look at that one census subdivision that it lands within, that's that one blue polygon, fairly large area. We then set up an FME process to calculate our cores. This is something you could typically do in ArcGIS, but you'd have to do every step every time you ran through this for each year of data. So those are the sections of the FME. So first all we did was pull in the source information, format it up a bit, and calculate things like population density, which would help us further on in the process. The next thing was to create those core Friendship Center CSDs. We created some attributes that would help us track it throughout the process, FC, UID, Friendship Center's unique IDs, and come out with some polygons for that. Then we went through and selected what would be the tier 1, what would be the ones that would be closest to this core. And we used the spatial relator. This may not be the best one to use, and I'll explain that why later on. But it did the process, and I didn't care too much about how long it took to process the routine. And we created our information from that, did some aggregation, and used the visualizer throughout for QC process as we went through. So visually, this is what it looks like. This is what it came back with. It took this core, what touched it? And that's what it resulted with. We also, as we were going through, could calculate the census information that we did have on each of these polygons to give us some sums. Like, what were we getting? How many Aboriginal people are actually in this area? And this was of great use for the Friendship Centers and just analyzing the process we were going through, seeing if we were actually capturing the population that was serviced by these Friendship Centers. We also wanted to, here we're taking a look at some of the individual attributes. We also wanted to then calculate, well, what's the distance from these Friendship Centers to the center, the core one, to these now tier 1 polygons. So we did some simple things. We did an inside point extractor, stripped out the points from the core and the destination, each of the tier 1s, and then created a line between them, calculated the length. Very simple things that you do normally in a GIS, but it just happens so much faster in FME. Okay, so that was what the southern one looked like. Tier 2, we did the exact same process, so I won't show you the FME for that. We came back showing more of a tier 2 approach, where could that possibly be a service area for these Friendship Center? Not necessarily so. Would someone travel 76 kilometers to visit this Friendship Center? It's a question for the Friendship Centers, not for me, luckily. Okay, and then what we did in the end is we just did some aggregation to calculate some sums on this that we could then use to report back on how well the process worked. So let's just see what's this is some of the other attributes that came out. We formatted it up into an Access database so we could use it in the future as well. So let's just see how that worked on a Canada scale. We did our cores, and the next thing we did is we calculated our tier 1s, and right away we saw we had a problem. In the north, these CSDs are huge. So you end up with small areas, for instance up here in Nunavut, one location, but the tier 1 or the CSD that touches it covers half of the north. So a massive area, totally useless. Once we start throwing on the lines to the centers, we can see we obviously had problems. Go to tier 2 in half of the northern Canada. Although it does seem to work well in the south. Made us the idea of coming up with a second approach for doing the north. This just describes some of the methodology or the reasoning that we looked at going to a different approach for the north. So the ones in red, we decided that this first approach wasn't work, so let's go with a slightly different approach. If we take those off, we can see that the tier approach is working. My mouse isn't showing up. It's working in most areas. We're getting a sort of a compact area that might be serviced by that. For the northern approach, we used a completely different workbench. I wanted to process everything through with this one, but we had some problems with the amount of time it took. When I processed all 118 Friendship Centers using a northern or a buffered approach, it ran for 7 days, and I didn't get anything in the end. So I had to shrink it down to just the ones that we had highlighted in red before, and then it ran 30 minutes. So obviously I was running into just a sort of a threshold problem. So this one, we'll just take a quick look. We take the source attributes, source data, and calculate some attributes for them. We then go in and create our buffers. So all we did here is create a 50 kilometer for our tier 1 and a 100 kilometer for our tier 2. We built some areas out of that. And when we take a look at that, we'll see what happens in one of these northern communities like Fort McMurray. You can see here that it's a pretty remote location. We have here the dissemination areas. So we started off with the municipal ones for the southern approach. Now we're using those smaller ones for the northern approach. And you can see the tiered approach wouldn't work here because within a one step or what touches this core dissemination area, there's only like a few of them, and it's just a tiny area. So the buffered approach worked much better, 50 kilometer buffer. And what we did there in the FME process was we actually selected the DAs that landed within. So this was using the overlap and the spatial relator. We then calculated how much overlap existed, because we do have a problem with these still large DAs. These still cover all of Canada. So there's a puzzle that covers all of Canada. And if I just used a buffer to select the ones that crossed it, I was going to have problems. I used the buffer to clip out all my dissemination areas and then actually merge the information back into the original feature to figure out how much is 50% or over. So if we just take a quick look at how that worked, this is calculating the distance again, just like we did last time, where we take the 2 points and calculate how far away we are. Let's just see what that looks like graphically, though. Then we had this is actually pulling out the ones that were 50% or under. And again, using FME, this was great. I could experiment with 50%. Is that the proper area calculation? To see if it's worked better with a different percentage. So on the 50 kilometer one, when we selected everything that was completely within or 50% or more area within, we can see what we have coming back here. This large one, more or less than 50% is in, so it didn't show up. When we go to the 100 kilometer, we can see we get a bit of a different result. As we were going through this, we could check it all out by using FME to do some sums and calculations for us to make sure that we were actually getting a proper increase. One of the things with dissemination areas is they're so small, Statistics Canada won't provide necessarily Aboriginal populations. They are scared of identifying individual people. So at the CSD, the municipal level, they would release that data because it's a large enough area. So at this level, we didn't really know how many Aboriginal people were there. We had to wait for our retrievals to come back. So again, just looking at how this works at a Canada level, here we have the northern ones with the buffers applied, and you can see it's much more reasonable catchment areas than we were landing with last time. Again, we had an access output for this one as well. And just to look, we created a lot of shape files. So this is the shape files that came out of it. Now, the second thing that we looked at was we saw all those catchment areas that we created for the existing friendship centers. Using that information, we were able to identify potential gaps. At the municipal level, we still had Aboriginal population. With all of the calculations we did on Tier 1 and Tier 2, we now had the distance from all of these municipalities to the center again. So we could use things like, okay, it didn't land within the catchment area of any of them, so maybe it's a potential place that Friendship Center could be located. Or it did land, but it was far enough away, or it has a high enough Aboriginal population to figure out exactly whether or not this could be a gap. We didn't use FME for this process because we were dealing with a smaller list. But again, this could be automated, and I probably will for 2011 put this in as another thing that will be automated, and we can just change the parameters to get different results out. That was going back to the southern approach. That was part of the southern approach's FME routine to come out with this list of gaps that we could then further process. So that's just what it looked like. It was a very simple matcher back to the original data with the ones that we did calculate. So these were the Friendship Center locations, and what we came back with was the potential Friendship Center locations. So there was a couple of different series of criteria we had for gaps. That's why there's triangles, dots, and squares. But it came back with a pretty good list. We knew we did a good job when we found out that since the census was taken, since we had the list, they'd actually had put one in one of the areas we identified as a gap. So it turns out that it's working very well. And then for these gaps, we ran through the whole thing again. We did all catchment areas for these potential gap locations. So then they could identify not just the location, but what probably would be the population serviced by that area. In the end, I said we needed to bring this all back to Statistics Canada, and they like things really simple. So we didn't give them any geography files. All we gave them was a list that had our unique ID for each of the friendship centers or our unique ID for the gaps that we identified. What's the unique ID for the census geography coverage, and what's the grouping? So just 3 columns. We gave it back to them, and we come back with basically a new amalgamated geography of information, which is very useful for us. There was about 18 tables worth of information, 500 megs worth of data, just tabular data that we got back from Statistics Canada on everything from Aboriginal identity to migration to housing to poverty, community well-being index, human development index. These are combinations of other attributes. And the result that we're providing them to them in is a very, very simple web interface. These are policy people. They have no GIS experience whatsoever, couldn't even define it. Therefore, they needed something really simple. We didn't even go with a web application. All we went with was a static GIF file with, when you move your mouse over top of the province, it goes into a provincial map. They move their mouse over top of one of these, and it gets the data for them. Simple static images. They can't zoom in, they can't zoom out. But for the client, this is amazing. This is exactly what they need. That's something we can't forget about when we're doing projects for people is there are clients out there that don't want to have to open up Google Earth. They don't want to have to go and get something complicated. They really need something simple. And this is about the level that's going to handle them. They've been working in the policy for 30 years. They don't need to see something that's going to blow them away. What they do when they click on one of these communities is we serve them back a dashboard that's built on a database. All the information, and I don't have a blow-up of this for you to show you because it gets quite complicated and I didn't want to spend all my presentation on this, but it takes all those attributes, gives them charts, gives them maps, gives them some statistics on each of the pieces of information for the catchment area, and we actually provide them a little bit of a map that shows, well, when you say you have one for the Canadian Native Friendship Centre, what area are you talking about? So this gives them an idea of what area that Friendship Centre can now go to that website, click on it, get information on them, and eventually they'll be able to look at 2001 and 2006 information, do some comparisons, 2011, we'll just keep it going. And this is amazing information for them. They could never get their hands on this before. And it's just a simple process that was put in place. We also provide some larger letter size PDFs for them as well. Advantages of FME, they talked a little bit the past couple days how it's the small things that make a difference. Where it really makes a difference is being able to have things like that feature count. For someone who doesn't have a chance to use FME every day, having that feature count is a great tool for just figuring out where my transformation is breaking and figure it through. The output to multiple format has been great, and the quality control, the testing, has been really advantageous for us. And also performing the calculations on the fly has been great as well. So that is what we were able to do for the Friendship Centres, and thank you for paying attention.